Hello, again, Northstar here with another Singularity Let's Play. This music's a little loud for me. Maybe it's just because I'm somewhat aggravated having to deal with absolute terrible levels of shadiness from family that I have to live with because I'm disabled long COVID. And, well, my wife I've had to deal with family are just jerks. Like one of them asked if they were going to do something they talked about doing, and then they respond with one of their typical insults: "Are you on drugs?" Otherwise, "You're crazy," or just all sorts of nastiness. Whenever this person doesn't want to do something, even if they talked about doing it or they want to deny it, they said something before, they just say something rude like this. I'm not the one who's noticed it. I don't want to name what relatives I have and reveal too much of myself, but other members of my family, extended family, have noticed this too about this person. But that person was my dad, who's a terribly abusive jerk when I was growing up. It's stressful to deal with this stuff. It's worth noting. I was recently engaging with leaving a comments in the YouTube comment section. Probably, like, my comments always seem to go completely ignored, but it was a second thought video, and he was talking about how bad the U.S. education system is. Fine, everyone knows that it's terrible. Then he was like, kind of suggesting, oh, maybe an expansion of homeschooling programs. I think that's like, no. Expansion of homeschooling programs make people more subjected to the influences and whims and abuse, often, of terrible family. I mean, there's some really, really shitty parents out there who should never have had kids, just to begin with, and are abusive and such, and then and that stuff very rarely gets caught. I know there's government agencies deal with that kind of thing. It rarely gets caught. People hide it often. There's a situation where it would be worse because the lack of a safety net for kids who are removed from such situations. They end up in a worse situation often. So even kids will help hide stuff sometimes if they know or are threatened or told that that's what would happen if they're removed from that situation. But anyways, you expand homeschooling programs, you make kids more subject to stuff. And even if parents aren't like that, to that extreme, some parents are just stupid or lazy or uninterested in their kids' lives and would make terrible teachers for homeschooling, but might do it just because it's more convenient for them or something. There's good reasons homeschooling is not the norm and that public education exists. Indeed, while people often criticize how it was created in the United States, public education was built to create good, loyal, servile factory workers, and that's true. There's another element that's often ignored, and that's in the 1800s, alcoholism and abusive behavior were rampant. There were a lot of alcoholic parents, neglectful sorts. Some of these social problems are actually less severe now than they were back then, considerably less. And partly because, like, rehab programs for alcoholics didn't exist back then. Alcoholics Anonymous didn't have their program and that kind of stuff. So public schools were partly also about getting kids out of the house from sometimes like abusive alcoholic parents, and there's the stereotype like the drunken father who comes home and beats his kids. and like particularly the Irish one, because I know that's a race should not it's racially charged stereotype, but while it doesn't matter what ethnicity someone is, the fact that those kind of stereotypes came in large part out of Boston and New York City. Boston was where the first Department of Education, State Department of Education, was created in the United States in 1837, and then 30 years later, the Federal Department of Education was created. New York City, I think, followed pretty soon after Boston, with New York creating one. Massachusetts, and Boston, New York City, New York State. Um, the point being, areas with big problems with alcoholism and abuse and these kind of things, often symptoms of rapid urbanization and the desperate poverty which the working class are forced into in the Industrial Revolution. People take out their angst, their stress, their anxieties on their family is abusive behavior dynamics too often back then. I mean, it still happens today, so this kind of psychology is well understood. Um, Point being is public schools existed. It wasn't always stated aloud, but this is another reason that they existed. Um, as well as like language assimilation, getting kids who are immigrants, many immigrant families in Boston, New York, and some other Chicago and such, that the kids would learn English. If they were homeschooled, they might only learn the language of their ancestors, and not absorb into the culture, which I know we live in a day and age now where people call assimilation a terrible thing. In fact, even on the MCAT, and the and there's questions sometimes about theories about that, and on the Casper, which is this stupid freaking test they make people take, and is less carefully regulated than the MCAT by just miles. It becomes a means of pushing whatever cultural norms or the accepted whatever perspectives the people who are running med schools at the time believe in. It becomes a tool of conformity because you answer questions about how you handle certain situations, but the acceptable answers, which are rarely spelled out in any official answer keys or stuff with past exams, the answers to get the highest scores will always be the ones that conform to the cultural norms of the people who are running the medical schools or requiring the tests, and they're the customers the way the company does the Casper sees it. So yeah, that's not okay to, because forces on cultural issues to force conformity, it's very politicized. And I do remember in that there was like a question about cultural assimilation a long time ago. Even years later, they're assholes about talking about the stuff that was on it too. So I can't probably say too much more. But these fuckers will try and like sue me or whatever garbage. But the fact is stuff like that. When you start putting cultural issues on exams, and then you start, I mean, subjective cultural issues, not like cultural knowledge, but like how would you handle if you're an immigrant in a country and your kids, their assimilation of the culture, and very much imply that the right answer is to like maintain your cultural identity, even if that is going to get to your kids suffering discrimination. And you may not be right to force other people to assimilate, but if you raising your own family, wanting them to avoid discrimination is a perfectly valid reason to at least encourage them a certain way, to the degree the parents have control of the kids, and they shouldn't have too much. If the kids want to do differently, they should be able to in that case. But I mean, there's all this stuff being pushed. We don't want a melting pot. We want a salad bowl. Well, there's cultural chauvinism, which is bad, and then there's just trying to deny that people should form a common culture. Just it gets to being aggressive against people living a culture and their right to, you know, at least like that their culture is established in an area, and at least they, you know, shouldn't be forcing people to it, but they should be able to have a certain expectation. Most countries in Europe, which are overly nationalistic, will pretty much expect that you culturally assimilate if you move to those countries. But with the U.S., Americans, that's not. Yeah. A certain level of cultural assimilation should be expected, even if you can still maintain some level of unique identity while doing that. I mean, I'm not advocating by any means for the aggressive, racist, chauvinist views you see from some on the right. But I'm, of course, an internationalist. I think I've explained a socialist, and so I very much like to see nationalism not be used to divide people and see a common culture of the whole planet form. That can't happen if people are so stubborn they won't even let common cultures of a single nation form. It's possible to have a level of common culture form while still respecting diversity and allowing people to lose some of the uniqueness, but not all of their uniqueness, because too many differences can be cause for ethnic tensions and stuff, and they can lead to like what happened in Yugoslavia, unfortunately. But I don't know. The things are being pushed because they're in the interest of the ruling class, and the ruling class wants to have these racial tensions and ethnic tensions, all religious tensions, all these things they can stoke. In this case, I'm talking about national cultural tensions, but I'm trying to draw it back to how they use anything they can to divide the working class. Homophobia, xenophobia, sexism, anything they can to divide people against each other, hoping that there's be a segment of the population buying into whatever phobia they're pushing, that they can divide that segment of the population off from the rest, and then get them to not focus on economic issues like wealth inequality. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. Expansion of homeschooling would not be a good thing. Just as in America, the mass privatization of education is a problem, as the second thought video talked about, because a lot of the private schools end up being religious, and while there's nothing wrong with wanting to raise your kids in a religious school, the American Christian right has co-opted Christianity. It's turned into this toxic homophobic thing that doesn't even resemble in any way what Christianity originally was. Jesus would be considered a communist if he was alive today. He was literally someone who advocated caring for your neighbor above all else, and criticized the rich endlessly. And the early Christians did live in communes, not as in Marxism, because Marx didn't exist then, but as in, you can even look at it, it's in Acts in the Bible. They abandoned all they had. They shared all they had as equals, and lived as almost like a regression to primitive communism in a way. Sharing all their wealth and forming these communities that would live kind of apart from the rest of society. And the Roman Empire hated this and tried to suppress it, and eventually did successfully, even before it fell apart. But Christians were some of the first communists in that sense of the word, those who lived in communes, as opposed to Marxism, which is a much later version of socialism, but mind you, socialism um, long predates Marx, and I'm not even saying they were socialists. They weren't. Socialism is about controlled means of production. I'm saying they were people who lived in communes, which we lack a word for other than communist that, in English at least, that accurately describes um, that. Um, I mean, like we call religious communes. Communes the same thing we call like the Oneida Commune in the United States, which was an economic commune. It was a socialist commune that ended up making very high quality silverware. Became famous for it, eventually reformed into a private for-profit corporation, but for a time they were actually a commune where all the people worked together to make silverware and many other goods, candles, other stuff, and shared the profits amongst themselves. It was kind of a weird thing, but it's historical record. It happened, whether or not it's weird. Of course, no person with Marxist views would espouse quite something like that. It's not very practical, to say the least. I am a democratic socialist, so a Marxist, but not a Marxist-Leninist. Although I have no problem with the Marxist-Leninists. They can say what they want. I'm not going to make them my enemy. They're not. They're just mistaken about some things, and they're a lot closer to having a plan for a functional society than capitalists who have us in this system that's destroying the earth and destroying our culture. And by destroying our culture, I mean destroying any sense of community and worshipping greed above all else, and the almighty dollar, and atomizing communities right down to the point where people don't know their next door neighbor. That's directly caused by capitalism, as well as climate change, as well as endless wars in like the Middle East and stuff over oil. That's pretty obvious. Most people know that's got something to do with capitalism, even if they don't know anything else bad about it. They just accept that as a necessary evil because they don't know all the other things capitalism does wrong. And if they knew all of the problems, they would just throw in the towel in it and say, no, okay, we clearly have to get rid of capitalism. What should we do next? And that's where the debate should be. Instead of capitalism or whatever else, it should be, we must go beyond capitalism. What should we move to? How should we structure a better society? That's where the debates should be. The billionaires weren't funding far-right think tanks and controlling the media, making it so that we still are, as a society, unable to move beyond the idea of capitalism, even though it's clearly dysfunctional. It needs to be replaced by something. And of course, they're also trying to move us towards fascism, which is disgusting. And by the way, still capitalist. Let me be clear. Like the Nazis, literally, the term privatization was coined to describe what the Nazis were doing. They were taking what were previous government-run services and putting them in the hands of private capitalists. They were not socialist, despite the misleading name of their party, which Hitler is some might call him a great liar. Great is in the sense of saying very huge lies, and that was just one of his big lies. The naming of his own political party. He was a bastard. Anyways, to say something is something just because someone says it is, even if the person is well known to be a liar, that's just dishonest. Well, anyways, I wish you all the best. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may you always find guidance to lead you home.